Hello, DeMatha Nation. My name is Ben Flary, class of 2011 and current staff member here at DeMatha. Over the past few months, we've interviewed several notable stags, not just as a way to showcase the various successes from the school, but also to give a chance to keep the DeMatha community connected and engaged throughout this pandemic. I'm joined today by fellow staff member Connor Glowacki, who will be helping me conduct today's interview with our two special guests. We're joined today by Dwayne Preston, DeMatha class of 87. Dwayne's the current Deputy Chief of the Bowie Police Department. And we're also joined by Kevin Davis, class of 87, and was Baltimore's 39th Police Commissioner from 2015 to 2018, and former Anne Arundel County Police Chief. Dwayne Preston began a career in law enforcement with the Prince George's County Police Department in 1990. He served the department for 21 years until retiring from the agency as the Deputy Chief, Bureau of Administration in December 2011. On January 1st, 2012, Deputy Chief Preston continued his law enforcement career with the Bowie Police Department, and he continues to serve in this position and oversees the daily operations of the department and several projects such as the Police Communication Center, principal author of the department's strategic plan, oversight of internal investigations, and the implementation of the department's body-worn camera program. Deputy Chief Preston is a proud graduate of DeMatha, and he obtained his bachelor's degree in business administration with a concentration in accounting from Bowie State University, and obtained his MBA from University of Maryland University College. Chief Preston was asked to serve on the Police Reform Task Force convened by County Executive Angela Alsobrooks. And this was an important role and provided an opportunity to be involved in offering recommendations that would improve the PG County Police Department and the policing professional in general. Deputy Chief Preston has been married to his wife for 26 years and has two children, a daughter who is a senior at University of Maryland and a son who is currently a senior at DeMatha High School. Our next guest, Kevin Davis, led the Baltimore Police Department as its 39th Police Commissioner in 2015 to 2018, following the historic riots and during the Department of Justice's civil rights investigation. Commissioner Davis negotiated a federal court-ordered consent decree with DOJ during a presidential transition of power. He has substantial crisis leadership experience in a national spotlight while leading reform initiatives in use of force, training, and technology that received industry attention and accolades. Commissioner Davis is a collaborative leader and consensus builder amongst diverse community groups, faith communities, elected officials, law enforcement peers, and business partners. Prior to leading the nation's 8th largest police department in Baltimore, Davis served as police chief for the Anne Arundel County Police Department, Maryland Police Department, and retired as the assistant police chief for PG County, Maryland Police Department. He's a graduate at the FBI National Academy and FBI National Executive Institute, and has served on the board of directors for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Kevin has been recognized by the Johns Hopkins University Alumni Association with its Woodrow Wilson Award for Distinguished Government Service, and is one of 16 alumni from DeMatha to ever receive its Distinguished Alumnus Award. He's a 4th-generation public safety servant and was born and raised in College Park. He was awarded the key to the city of College Park in 2009, and Commissioner Davis now serves as GardaWorld's Director, Consulting Services. He has most recently served as the Chief Security Officer for Armored Things in Boston from 2018 to 2020, and he is currently an adjunct professor at American University and lecturer at the Catholic University of America. He is married to his wife and has 4 children. So with that being said, gentlemen, we'd like to introduce Kevin and Dwayne, and thank you both for your time today and for joining us today. And I hope you both are doing well. Just, start off with Kevin, hope things have been well. Just wanted to see, how you've been holding up during this pandemic.
So thank you, Ben. Thank you, Connor. And thank you to DeMatha for having me on with Dwayne. Dwayne and I go back to the fall of 1983. I see Mike Ritter's on the call and some 86 alums, Brian Axon. I think, Obi, you did 6 years at DeMatha, but I think you graduated in 86. But it's good to see so many familiar faces on a call. So I'm holding up well as can be expected. And I just can't thank you for having me. Great opportunity.
Thanks, Kevin. And Dwayne, how about yourself?
Same thing. I appreciate the opportunity, to come on the call to see everyone. A lot of the gentleman that we went to school with, graduated with, has been a long time, obviously over 30 years. Having the opportunity to reconnect with DeMatha as my son is a senior down there, and obviously Kevin and our sons will be graduating together. Prayerfully a real graduation, hopefully in the spring. But we're doing well. Family is healthy, and I think that's the most important thing during this difficult time. So look forward to the discussion.
Good. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This is going to be great. So first question, I'll ask it to you, Kevin, first, and then Dwayne, you can answer as well. But Kevin, just wanted to know what attracted you to a career in law enforcement. Was there a specific instance maybe in high school or maybe after that you knew you wanted to be a police officer, or how did that kind of come about?
Well, Ben, I've been asked that question a lot, and I wish I had an answer that was, sexier than the real answer. And the real answer is I was born and raised the son of a Prince George's County police officer. My grandfather, great-grandfather, DC firefighters, and that side of my family, the Davis side of my family, were all cops and firefighters. But I never had a particular inclination to go into policing. I was always around it my entire life, and I certainly saw the camaraderie that existed. I saw the commitment to service that existed, so I was around it. But I never was encouraged or discouraged by my family to go into policing. Actually, I went to college, and my undergraduate degree is in English. So I think I fancied myself as a future prolific writer or novelist. That's still on my bucket list. But I joined the Prince George's County Police Department at, I think I was just about 23. I was in the academy class right after Dwayne's academy class, and I loved every minute of it. I think maybe I had the inclination that I was going to, quote unquote, try it out. But once you're in that profession, you kind of get hooked. And it's the Prince George's County Police Department that Dwayne and I served for the first half of our careers really had a reputation that wasn't always a great reputation. And we went through several years of reform. We went through several years of improving the crime fight and enhancing our relationship with the community at the same time. And newsflash, both can be done at the same time. So Dwayne and I were there during those years of reform in the crime fight and a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of media scrutiny, and we came out the other side of it. And I'll say this about our alma mater police department, the Prince George's County Police Department, it's today one of the best in the entire country. And it was an honor to be there during those tough years. And I think really Dwayne and I both cut our teeth in leadership positions along the way, and hopefully we're better off for it.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for your service to our community. Dwayne, what about yourself? Is there any point in your career that kind of got you into law enforcement, or a specific instance maybe?
Sure. And I think my story is probably completely opposite, obviously, than Kevin's. I had no family members that were ever involved in law enforcement. It was not something that I had an inclination to pursue. Actually, even while at DeMatha, and I know that this is something we can discuss even getting into later, is that I had a negative experience at the time being a sophomore at DeMatha. I attended a private school dance at what was Lorraine, which is now Drew Freeman Middle School. I had 3 county officers, one grabbed me by my neck and told me he's gonna break my effing neck. So I had never had a negative incident before. Me being a member of a private school, I never thought it could happen to me. But never had an inclination that I would end up becoming a police officer. That wasn't something that at the time, that we even pursued. Back then, it wasn't really much. It was something that unfortunately was standard that happened. And so we didn't even pursue making a complaint. Fast forward that to my time, while I was in college, I'm trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And Prince George's County Police ended up having a job fair at the university, which I attended. It piqued my interest at that point. Actually, a buddy of mine that also ended up joining Metropolitan Police Department. We both got hooked. But I only had an interest for Prince George's County Police Department. It's the only police department I ever applied for. Had I not gotten hired by the county police, I probably would be accountant to this day because that was what my major was. But once I got involved and I realized the flexibility, the freedom, all of the different things, and not being tied to a desk that the profession offered, the ability to help people to serve was really something that grasped me. Then the opportunities to do the various things we were able to do throughout the course of my career. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to be able to pursue leadership positions and obtain those things and make an impactful change on the agency. As Kevin mentioned, we've seen our department transform. Went from an agency that was known for brutality and all those kind of different things in the 90s and before, went through the unfortunate occurrences of being under a Department of Justice consent decree and memorandum of agreement. Those things were not pleasant times to go through. But one thing that we discussed to this day is that I believe that it propelled this police department to be one of the best police departments throughout this country because of those reforms that were put in place. Having the opportunity to go through that, really allowed us to really see the errors of our way and to do better. And I think that those trends continue.
Dwayne, Kevin, as individuals who have enjoyed long careers in law enforcement, this is going to sound like a loaded question possibly and maybe an existential question, but I feel like the two of you are best suited to answer this. Why do police exist in the first place?
Well, Connor, maybe I'll take it and I'll reference a conversation that Dwayne will remember because Dwayne and I had this conversation just a few days ago. And we talked about where American policing has kind of gone wrong from time to time over the years. And we both referenced a man by the name of Sir Robert Peel. Sir Robert Peel, if you remember, was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He also is considered the father of modern British policing. And in 1829, Sir Robert Peel, I happen to have it in front of me because I actually anticipated this question, Connor. The basic mission of the police is to prevent crime and disorder, but it's much more than that. And where we find ourselves as a profession now goes to something that Sir Robert Peel wrote in 1829. So there's nothing new under the sun. And in 1829, Sir Robert Peel said, the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police existence, actions, behavior, and the ability of the police to secure and maintain public respect. So the police have to block and tackle. So the X's and O's is we have to prevent crime, solve crime. That's always going to be a constant, but we have to do it in a way that respects all groups of people, all walks of life. And we haven't always done that. We've engaged from time to time, even in the course of Dwayne's career and my career, and I see Garland Hawkins is on, he's a law enforcement career guy. Sometimes we've engaged in policing strategies like zero tolerance policing, for example, that had a disparate impact on Black and brown communities. And that was wrong. And I think we've learned from that and trying to get better from that. I'm a big believer, Connor, that two things can be true at the same time. So one thing that's true is that we've gotten many things wrong over the years, particularly the drug war years, the zero tolerance years. We've gotten some things wrong. That's true. And I think the profession's working hard to improve that. The other thing that's true, simultaneously true, is that policing is better than ever. It's certainly far from perfect, but policing in the course of our careers, 3 decades, is much, much different than it was when Dwayne and I started. So we've got a long way to go. We've come a long way, but I don't even remember your loaded question, but hopefully I'm somewhere in the ballpark of it.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. That was a great answer.
Dwayne, I'm not sure if you wanted to follow up.
Kevin answered it, and he's right in referencing the discussion that we had. I think that the key, the only thing that I will add, and this is something that I talk often with our officers today, is that the policing style really comes from the community in terms of what they desire. And in order for us to know that, we got to really engage the community and hear from them. because some of the things that we define, and that's what often happens, that police officers end up determining what we believe is important and what needs to be enforced, and what crimes need to be, are the most important. That doesn't always marry up to the community in which you're here to serve. And if there's no engagement of that community to understand exactly what is important and what is not, then that's where you kind of miss each other. And I think that that's what you're seeing a little bit today is that there's been no communication, no understanding, as from the perspective of police officers as to what they're seeing on a daily basis. And this is it's a very tough discussion. If you put yourselves in the shoes of officers that work certain communities day in and day out, it's tough. And Kevin and I both work probably some of the roughest areas of Prince George's County. I started off in what is considered District 3, which is the Landover, Kentland area. And back then back crack cocaine was a huge thing that was going on in the area in the 90s. We saw a lot of violence, a lot of death, and we didn't deal with a lot of people that were quote unquote the best of society. And when you take someone at 21 years old, 22 years old, throw them into that environment, something they never experienced in their lifetime, and they're dealing with that on a day in and day out basis, sometimes they lose perspective and forget the reason in which they decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, which to help people and to serve. Therefore, I think it's leadership's responsibility to recognize that, look at rotations and look at continued training and encourage, people to engage each other and to understand the needs of the community. And I think that if law enforcement, continues in that trend, I think that they can restore the trust that the community will have in law enforcement. But I think there's many factors, a complicated issue. And I think that there's valid points on both sides, regardless if you're pro law enforcement or, those that are critical of some of the tactics today.
Thank you, Dwayne. Now, Dwayne and Kevin, so we all know and witnessed the horrific murder of George Floyd back in May. What impact did George Floyd's murder have on policing and just the society as a whole?
Well, Ben, maybe I'll volley that question to me. Policing really changed twice in my career, two significant moments. One, the first moment that policing really changed in my career was 9/11. We totally shifted and started to address some of the domestic terrorist aspects of Homeland Security, and policing changed. We became more collaborative and better. The second moment that policing really changed in my career was really before George Floyd's death, before his murder, and that's what it was. And it goes back to Ferguson, in my opinion, with the death of Michael Brown. And then after Michael Brown came Laquan McDonald. And then after Laquan McDonald came Eric Garner in New York. And then after Eric Garner in New York came Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And I served as the police commissioner in Baltimore. I got appointed right as the riots were winding down. So I literally lived through those moments. And I'm a big believer in people exercising their right of free speech, their right to protest, their right to demonstrate. And one of America's biggest policing think tanks, the Police Executive Research Forum, has kept track religiously of the number of protests and demonstrations that have taken place post George Floyd's death. And they estimate that 8,700 protests have occurred since then. Peaceful demonstrations of Black, white, and brown, young and old folks who saw what we saw with our own eyes and said that can't happen in America. It does happen in America, right? That's the wake-up call, and it can no longer be acceptable. So I applaud people who peacefully demonstrate and protest. And, the conversation about what a demonstration and a protest looks like is something we should have as well, because of those 8,700 protests, only about 6.5% of those protests turned into violence, riots, destruction of property, arson. But 6.5% of 8,700 is about 570. So, and I personally got to know in Baltimore a lot of these activists, a lot of people who recruit people to participate in demonstrations and peaceful protests, and it detracts from their message when they have those types of activities happen, because that's where the concentration goes. So I think, again, it gets back to what I said earlier, two things can be true at the same time. The first thing that's true is, we should respect the message that's contained in these peaceful protests, learn from it, get better as a society, but we also have to condemn the violence associated with riots, the arson, the destruction of property, the people that get hurt. That can't be acceptable. But I think what we've learned is policing, society needs to continue to change and get better. And that's the moment that we're in right now. We're living history as we speak.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think that, what I'll start by saying is that having been in law enforcement now for 30 years, I'm proud of the profession that I've chosen. I wouldn't change a thing. That doesn't say that there are many things that have occurred throughout the profession, that I'm proud of, because I'm not. I started in the academy, when the occurrence of Rodney King's beating happened in LA, and the ensuing verdicts and the riots that followed. And unfortunately, we fast forward, to today, and not a lot has changed. Some of the same things that are going on. I think the biggest difference between George Floyd and Rodney King is that this is the first time that I've ever seen in history law enforcement leaders, whether it's from the fraternal order of police or the unions, as well as police leadership, have come out united and actually condemned the actions of what occurred to George Floyd. I think that that's one of the first times I've ever seen this happen collectively. And I think that this has started this movement where law enforcement is actually joining with the community to recognize that there are reforms that are needed. And anyone that would think anything different, in my opinion, is someone that has their head buried in the sand. We realize that there's been disparate treatment of African Americans and people of color throughout this country for many, many years. And that won't be something that's going to change overnight. But I think there has to be a concerted effort to move toward that and to treat people with equity, because we got to listen to everyone. One of the biggest things for me is that oftentimes we didn't really want to hear from a lot of the advocacy groups because you knew that there was going to be a big difference of opinion. My leadership style is that those are the various people we have to have the courage to sit down with and talk to and listen. We hope that they will listen to us and understand our perspective, but we also need to listen and understand their perspective. We may not always agree on all of the points, but I think there's a path forward that can be found where we can make our communities and policing a lot better for everyone.
Dwayne, Kevin, I wanted to relay a message from one of your classmates, Ron Lucas. Your all's class of '87. And he wants to know, since both of you have been working in the field of law enforcement, how do you guys define leadership? And maybe Dwayne, maybe you can go first answering that question.
Thanks, Connor, and appreciate Ron. Good seeing you, and thanks for the question. For me, leadership is really about courage. It's about being modeling the behavior, science. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's getting up every single day, being able to look yourself in the mirror, being comfortable with what you see, and being that example. Because you can say one thing and do something different. That's not being a leader. And I think that, over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to do that. That builds the credibility, and being able to challenge people when things are wrong. I think that's one of the biggest things, to stand up and sometimes have to go against what is commonplace in the profession and say, hey, this is wrong. And it's wrong, and I'm not going to tolerate that. And I think that that's where we are today. Not because of time, but, be honest. And, we're fortunate at this point, where I am in my career, where I tell people, I say, I have nothing to lose. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm going to get fired. So what? I already have a retirement, right? So it's not a big deal to me anymore. So those are the things that I'm going to always be honest. I'm going to be, truthful, because my obligation is to the community in which I serve. So I think, you got to lead from the front and be an example.
Great, Dwayne. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, Connor, don't let Dwayne fool you. He's got like 5 pensions coming in, so he's all right. But I'll say this, in policing, and we were both part of large police departments throughout the majority of our careers, you go from being one of the guys, you know, and Dwayne and I have both served in operational units, and I was on the SWAT team, I was in street narcotics. So you're one of the rank and file, you're doing the tough work, you're grinding it out day in and day out. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in supervisory and leadership positions. And it's a very difficult transition to make, particularly that very first rank, the rank of sergeant. That's the first line supervisory position in policing. And for those in other professions on the call, you can imagine what your first line supervisory position is in your profession. It's the toughest one to make the transition to. And one thing I tell new leaders is you have to accept the fact, and only really time and experience helps you do this, that you're much better off being respected than you are being popular. And that's a tough lesson for any leader to learn. Leadership is something you know it when you see it. You know, one of Colin Powell's great quotes about leadership is that a true leader inspires people to follow him or her, if out of nothing else but a sheer sense of curiosity. So leaders have a way, like Morgan Wooden, like Bill McGregor, of inspiring people to trust them, to follow them, and to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be inclined to do because they trust you. So, you know, and not to throw too many sports quotes around, but, you know, the Jimmy Johnson, you know, unfortunately he coached the Cowboys, but he's always been fond of saying that it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmys and Joes. And really, at the end of the day, your people remember how you made them feel versus what you did, what you accomplished. So true leadership, it's like Dwayne said, on one hand, it's not rocket science, I agree. But on the other hand, it's an elusive thing that not many people figure out a way to achieve in any profession.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Dwayne. Next question from Frank Persico. He asked, I guess we'll start with Dwayne as well on this one. He asked, is it hard to recruit new/young law enforcement people these days with the stress that law enforcement folks are going through?
Well, I would say that recruitment, you know, over the years has become increasingly difficult. And there are many factors that have impacted that. I think that one of the biggest things, and I know Kevin was instrumental in some of the changes and recommendations to surrounding marijuana usage when he was commissioner of Baltimore City. There's a big barrier with this generation today. And many people just don't know and understand. We all were young, have done things that, you know, as you get older, you decide and realize they weren't the best decisions. But there was a time in law enforcement where marijuana usage would preclude you from ever pursuing a career in the policing profession. And there's been some great strides to make some changes and reductions as some of the morals and values of society have shifted. So, you know, I think we still see a great number of candidates. I think that there are varying factors because, you know, as the morals of society have decayed, I think we've had some more challenges in finding people that can meet the rigorous standards within law enforcement. But do I believe that the profession, you know, is, you know, facing an uphill battle? I think that depends on the leadership. And I think it's incumbent upon us to really start to reach back down to, you know, the school level and really, again, I think policing has to be open and we have to communicate. And I don't think we've done a very good job of explaining to people what it takes and the requirements it takes to become a police officer. And the earlier that we can do that and invest into our younger people, we'll hopefully put them in a position that they'll be able to serve. But I think there are many people out there that would desire to continue to serve. It's not about money. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the biggest challenges is that many people, as they're pursuing college degrees, and I'll use my daughter as a perfect example, she's not even graduated from University of Maryland, was already offered a full-time job at Northrop Grumman. We cannot compete with those kind of salaries within the profession. So you're really appealing to people's desire to serve. And there's a segment of people out there in the community that do want.
Kevin, got a question from James D'Amico. His son Joey graduated in 2002. He heard you mention about the DC Fire Department. He retired from the DC Fire Department in '95 after 27 years. So he was wondering for you how your specific connections with DC Fire Department.
Yeah, well, it goes back many generations. My great grandfather, I believe he was the number 2 guy with the DC Fire Department. Had about a dozen kids and mostly boys, and they either became DC firefighters or DC police officers. And I remember as a child, my dad would take us to have breakfast at Company 19 on Pennsylvania Avenue in Southeast. It's actually called the Castle because it's DC's only gray fire station. And my grandfather was still a firefighter at the time and would cook us breakfast. So it goes back a ways. And I'll add, Connor, what Dwayne said about recruiting. Typically, traditionally, historically, when the economy has been bad in policing, it's kind of ironic because there aren't as many jobs out there. But now things are totally different. People are looking differently at policing because of all the scrutiny. And, you know, we need to do a better job at recruiting non-traditional police candidates. And I would use myself as an example. I'm about as traditional as you get. I'm the son of a cop, right? I'm a white guy born and raised in College Park, college degree. We need to find ways to recruit people who would never have thought about policing as a profession. And I don't think we're very good at that right now. I think the profession tends to attract thrill seekers, and there's nothing wrong. I think if you're in your 20s and you're a cop, if you don't have a little bit of a thrill seeker mentality inside of you, I don't want you, right? Because you don't have any fire in your belly. But eventually that thrill seeking mentality has to transition to a mentality of service to the community. And that's a maturation process that most police officers make. Some don't, but most do. But you know, we just need to think differently about who we recruit. And like Dwayne said, there was a time not so many years ago where it was tougher to become a police officer in the state of Maryland because of the strict standards than it was to become an FBI agent or a Secret Service agent or a member of the DEA or a Navy SEAL. Some of our hiring standards that Dwayne referenced, particularly marijuana use, were so archaic, it disqualified a lot of good people. So I'm looking at a lot of faces on this Zoom call. Many of you guys who would otherwise not be eligible are now suddenly eligible, but you're too old.
Thank you, Kevin. This is a question for both of you, and I guess we could start with Dwayne. O'Brien Atkinson, class of '86. He says that currently there's a movement to fully repeal the Maryland Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. What are your thoughts about this movement? And do you both believe it should be defended and preserved?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'm not a proponent of the full repeal of the LEOBR. Do I think there should be some significant modifications to it? Absolutely. And I think that, it serves many purposes. One of the concerns, and this issue was raised on the police reform task force that the county executive convened. One of the concerns I have is that if you do a full repeal of the LEOBR, there will be no standard unless it's replaced with something else. So therefore, every single police agency within the state of Maryland can make up their own process as it relates to discipline. So we think we have problems now. Take away the LEOBR, then you're going to be dealing with individual agencies and how they treat employees and how they handle matters of discipline. I think you end up with many more problems than you currently have today. Again, the LEOBR has been modified, over the past few years. There are additional modifications that I believe that both the community and those in law enforcement can agree upon. But I'm not in agreement of a full repeal.
Yeah, so I'll go. And Obi said he was going to send a softball question, but I'll answer it nonetheless. So we have to be wary of the unintended consequences of good intentions. And I think a lot of folks out there who just are unfamiliar with what LEOBR really is. And it's a law that was enacted in the mid-'70s And my dad was a cop before LEOBR, where there was no due process. And working conditions, environmental conditions, pay, healthcare, all those things in policing weren't nearly what they should have been. So police unions started, LEOBR was passed, it established due process. I've been a leader in 3 different Maryland agencies, and Prince George's and Anne Arundel totally worked well with LEOBR and FOP presidents. Oh, by the way, Obie's one of them. I think my batting average with you, Obie, was about 900. It wasn't 1,000, but I tried my best. But I was always able to work effectively with LEOBR. Now, I'll say this, when I transitioned to Baltimore, it wasn't as easy because the city of Baltimore had collectively bargained over the years. It's not one mayor's fault or one police commissioner's fault, but in Baltimore over the years, so much of management's rights and discipline were collectively bargained away. And it's done in a place like Baltimore because they weren't able to give pay raises. And so in exchange for not giving the pay and benefit increases that they should have been concentrated on, they were giving away management rights over the year, and it just got a little bit out of control. But throw the baby out with the bathwater, absolutely not. Fine tune it, be strategic, absolutely.
Thank you, Kevin and Dwayne. Next question, this is for Kevin Davis from Jason Ballou. He asked, did Baltimore City present any unique challenges as compared to Prince George's and Anne Arundel?
Well, Jason, the short and long answer is yes. I remember thinking when I was with Prince George's County, and typically we saw the second most violence in the state of Maryland year after year after year. And I remember thinking that we must be somehow similar to Baltimore in terms of challenges and the crime fight. Frankly, there is no comparison. The poverty in the city of Baltimore, well over 25, 26%. The amount of people who are profoundly addicted to drugs. The health commissioner who I served with, Dr. Lena Nguyen, conservatively estimated at one point that the city of Baltimore, and we're only talking about 600,000 people, had 30,000 people who were profoundly addicted to drugs. So the lack of transportation, the educational challenges, the housing challenges, the communities in Baltimore that are still suffering from the redlining laws that existed literally 100 years ago. So if you think of all the societal ills that can exist in our country, they all exist to varying high degrees in the 78 square miles of Baltimore City. So Baltimore City is a very challenging place because everything is a priority. And when I got there, I soon found out that every day was a crisis, and it was like drinking through a fire hose. That's why police commissioners there tend not to last very long. I actually succeeded the average, but it's a great city with great people, but the poverty, the utter poverty is a huge challenge. And I tell people all the time, and then I'll be quiet, but this topic I can talk about forever. The geographical proximity of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, they might as well be 1,000,000 miles away. Washington now, 2020, is a wealthy city with pockets of poverty. Baltimore has always been a poor city with pockets of wealth. And from that come a huge amount of disparities. And one thing we got wrong in the war on drugs is we should have, particularly back in the late 80s, early 90s, handled drug addiction as a public safety crisis as opposed to a policing crisis.
Kevin, Dwayne, we got a question from one of our coworkers in the advancement office here, Brendan Shea, class of 2000, director of mission advancement at DeMatha. He's wondering, both of you as DeMatha alumni and parents of current DeMatha students, who is a teacher or coach you wish your son could have had, or maybe they did have? So maybe Dwayne, maybe you can start us off.
Sure, and I saw that question pop up, so I was trying to give some thought to it. I think that what strikes me, as something that's of a benefit is that once I realized that people like Father Damien and Father James are still around, Dr. McMahon and others that when I was there, that speaks to obviously the commitment to the DeMatha family. And, just having my son to be able to experience that and to, Coach Messier and stuff, he was my homeroom teacher, obviously, that obviously he's no longer there. But, now my son plays baseball, obviously. And so Coach Steve Miller, who's an alum, now recently took over the helm there. So having the opportunity for, him to, learn from previous DeMatha alum is instrumental. I think that just the general experience and kind of even beyond my son, I've also had 3 nephews that I've also attended DeMatha prior to him. So most of the young men in our family have come through DeMatha. And so there's been a significant investment from the DeMatha community and family. And they're all have gone on to do well. And that's what I expect, that will continue with my son, Dwayne. So, I think it's just something that, is of intrinsic value that continues.
Yeah, to add to it.
Yeah, so that's something, again, I could talk forever about that. And about a month and a half ago, 2 of my fellow alumni who are actually on the call today, I paid them to register, Mike Ritter and John Hips. We rode up to a wedding together of another DeMatha alumnus in New Jersey. And on the way, we probably spent a half an hour telling Dick Messier stories. And back in the day, he pronounced his last name Messier. I don't know when he got fancy on us and pronounced it Messier. But my oldest son graduated in 2018, and he had the privilege of having Dick Messier as a health teacher. So a lot of stories. Dick is a genuine human being, Hall of Fame wrestling coach. I don't know how many, I think 30 plus championships he won over the years, but he's just a unique individual. My oldest son also had Joe Carroll. Joe Carroll was my homeroom English teacher my freshman year. And I eventually went on to be an English major in college, I think, because I had Joe Carroll my freshman year. I had Dan McMahon as an English teacher, and of course, Buck Offit. I think Mike Ritter and I had Buck together. But the quality of teachers in our day, as great as it was, and I'll say this from experience, like present tense experience, the teachers now are even better. And I give Dan McMahon a lot of credit for recruiting such quality educators and teachers. And there are a lot of people whose sons transfer from one school to DeMatha. And one of the things that they say is a common refrain is the quality of teachers at DeMatha just blows everybody else out of the water. And, from the outside looking in, of course, we're proud of our sports legacies. And I don't think that's something DeMatha should ever run away from. We win championships in football, basketball, lacrosse, baseball, you name it, right? That's important. But the quality of our teachers is, really what sets us apart. And there's so many. And then another guy, and this name is never mentioned, so this is kind of I'll throw this in there. I fondly remember Father Mike Helms as a religion teacher. And I don't know why, but I always enjoyed his classes. So anybody who had Father Helms back in the day, he was really good, Brendan. I don't know if he was around when you were there.
Those are great. Thank you, guys. Now, this may have, you may have to go into a little bit of thought about this, but was there maybe a certain memory or two that kind of stick out during your time at DeMatha? Maybe it's something related to sports or music or in a class. Maybe we could start with Dwayne. If there's like a specific memory that kind of sticks out to you during your time at DeMatha.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for me, I just think that it allowed me to, in some cases, I realized I had some regrets because there were some things that we had to rewind the clock. I would have done better, realizing the privilege and the opportunity my parents gave me to have an education from DeMatha. And I don't think I took full advantage of that. But I think it allowed me to grow and mature into a young man that allowed me to achieve the things that I have today. But, I had some challenges coming through. I had fortunate with some of the guys on the call here, with Kevin and Mike and Hips and others, so I played 1 year varsity football. Now, one thing I'll say this funny story because I I played football, as most people did, through boys club and things of that sort, where it was weight class. And unfortunately, I was always on the higher end. So I ended up playing the line all the time until I got to DeMatha. My freshman year, here I come in at 5'6", 110 pounds. And I decided to go out and look at the team. And I said, oh, my God, these guys are huge. So I didn't play, needless to say, until my junior year. But it allowed me to, now I was able to make the team, and, I wasn't a starter or anything. But that was fine. Unfortunately, I ended up getting meningitis in the spring of my junior year. So that was a challenge for me. I know that our senior year, the team went on and became one of the greatest teams that DeMatha's ever had in the history. So all of those are great memories. I can't mention the countless basketball games. I had two cousins that were rivals. One cousin was a starting point guard from class 86 for Gonzaga. And the other one graduated with me the same year in 87. So I come from a bunch of family, had a lot of people that went to WCAC schools. It is something that, is memorable for me. It's something I'm glad that both of my children have been able to experience WCAC schools. So it's really done a lot. And, getting into the professional world, Kevin and I run into many people that have benefited not only from DeMatha education, but WCAC across the board. I think it's really prepared a lot of people to achieve a lot of great things.
And I'll say this too, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, and of course we graduated in 87, but our 86 football team, and I was very privileged, fortunate to be a starting offensive guard, played right next to John Hips. Mike Ritter's on the call, starting defensive guard. Garland Hawkins was a junior, starting defensive tackle. I mean, we were loaded, and we ended up being number 6 in the country. Bill McGregor, of course, our head coach, Buck Offit, Pat McGroarty, Dino Campbell. I think that was Dino's second year as a coach, but we were 10-0 that year. And I say this with, believing every word of it. If we would have played 18 games that year, we would have been 18-0, no matter who we played. We were a special team in our backfield. And again, certainly if you go to DeMatha or you graduate from DeMatha and you don't think your senior class was the best class ever, there's something wrong with you. Having said that, objectively speaking, ours was the best class ever. Our backfield was John Jeffries, Tyrone Jackson, Phil Bryant. I mean, that should be a crime. So great experiences there. But you asked two particular memories, both in classrooms, both a little unconventional. One was with Mike Bray. Mike Bray was a history teacher, and Mike Bray, one of his teaching techniques was to take a roll of film and put the roll of film on a projector and turn the lights out, and we would watch a film. And Mike was in the class, and it was pitch black because Mike would draw the shades. He was down on the bottom floor. And right in the middle of our film strip, two guys burst into the room, tackle Mike Bray behind his desk. We didn't know who it was. The lights got flicked on. It was Derek Wittenberg and Sidney Lowe. So that is a memory. Another memory for those alumni who were fortunate to have Ray Smith for freshman algebra. Again, he was on the bottom floor. I think John Moylan put a lot of characters on that bottom floor for whatever reason. But I remember Ray Smith, and he would always walk around with a big pointer. And I remember one time he literally chased a classmate of ours by the name of Don Blankenship, who unfortunately passed away many years ago. Don was only two-way starter on our senior football team, phenomenal athlete, baseball, football, et cetera. But I remember he probably swung that stick at Don a few times, landing a couple, and made him literally climb out the window into the parking lot. So those teaching techniques, while unconventional, were certainly effective, and those and many more stick out. But I don't know if you can get away with that. And I'm sure, I see Bill Collins on this call, and if Bill were to tell stories, we'd probably all get indicted.
Kevin, Dwayne, you both mentioned previously about the peaceful protests that have been taking place this year and a lot of the improvements in policing throughout the years. What would you both say, real change, reform, progress, what would you both say that looks like to its core? Kevin, maybe you can go first with this.
I was hoping Dwayne would let me off the hook on that. Dwayne mentioned this earlier. Meeting with people who profoundly see the world differently than you see it, particularly policing, activists, advocates. After the riots and the unrest in Baltimore, I really grew as a person by having routine interactions with advocates and folks who absolutely saw the world differently than I did. And I think I became a better police leader, and I think I became a better person because of it. But what does success look like? We can never forget one of the fundamental purposes of policing is to prevent crime and disorder. So I think you have to look at the rate of crime in America. And crime in America has, at least in this century compared to the last 10, 20 years of the 20th century, dramatically decreased. So we have to keep our eye on that ball, but we have to police in a way that traditionally marginalized communities, and I'm talking about Black and brown communities, communities that live below the poverty level, fundamentally start to trust the police and not just call us when they're in crisis. We'll know that when we see it. I think we see it in pockets. I think it happens every day in policing. There's no doubt about it. But I think when we get to a place where our traditional adversaries or antagonists say, you know what, American policing has changed. Hopefully we'll get to that point sometime in our lifetimes. It's a constant challenge and struggle.
Dwayne, is there anything you want to add on top of that?
Just 2 points, and I think that this has been a moving target for me. And one of the biggest things is probably something that most people wouldn't expect. And my daughter's 21, and I think that having some insightful conversations with her has really challenged my thinking. In the course of my years of policing, I thought that I've served admirably. But even then, there's some things I look back on and say, I had an opportunity to do some things differently and would. But to have a daughter at 21 who sees the world in a profession, that I've dedicated 30 years to a little differently, and that's sobering. And it's something that, but instead of being offended, and this is where it started, I'm just being totally transparent. My daughter wants to be a defense attorney, a public defender at that. So you can kind of understand where this is going. We're two opposite sides, and we've had some very spirited conversations. But I had to start to realize and start to listen. And I think that that's one of the biggest things. And as I mentioned that earlier, I don't think as a profession, we've done a very good job of listening. And I think that we want to insert our will as to what we believe is best for this community. And we better start listening to the people in which we say we are here to serve. And I think if we do that, then I think there's a better path forward. The second point that I want to make is that law enforcement always sees ourselves as the answer. But I think that it's going to take a collaborative and collective approach of all government to work and community to work together for us to really bring about the change. So while I don't really support the term defund the police, and I don't think that that's what people truly really desire to see. But do I advocate that there needs to be an investment in other governmental services that are centered around a lot of the issues that Kevin talked about that exist in the city of Baltimore? That's real change, and really problem solving and getting to the root of the issues that exist that plague communities is they're really the only way forward for us to be able to work collaboratively to change some of these things. Some of the challenges within the school system, and we can speak specifically right here within Prince George's County. Many of us ended up as a product of DeMatha in private schools was because our parents realized that they didn't want to subject us to the public school system. And many of us as parents today, our children are in private schools for those same reasons. And that's not something that anyone needs to shy away from. It's a reality. It doesn't have to always be the future, but there needs to be some significant changes, that will change that trajectory in order for this community to continue to thrive.
Thank you, Dwayne. Last question before we go here. I guess we could start with Kevin. Now, I know you're obviously both graduates of DeMatha and you have sons at DeMatha. Dwayne said you've had some nephews go through DeMatha. In your opinion, what makes DeMatha, I guess, so special? What separates DeMatha from other high schools around the country, in your opinion, Kevin?
So in a nutshell, I've always talked to my boys about the 3 C's, competition. DeMatha is a very competitive environment, both in the classroom and on the field. If you go to if you go to DeMatha, like Dwayne mentioned earlier, his first day coming out for freshman football, and I had the same reaction, you're going to be challenged. You're going to be challenged athletically. You're going to be challenged in the classroom. We were both very fortunate, and again, Dan McMahon has celebrated, I think, his 20th year as principal, longest serving WCAC principal now, and has done a phenomenal job. But we came up with John Moylan as our principal, and John Moylan ran a tight ship, and there's nobody more competitive than John Moylan, either in the classroom or on the field. So you have to, your ego gets challenged, and the competitive nature makes you better. And then the second C is camaraderie. All boys Catholic school. We, from diverse backgrounds, different races, different neighborhoods growing up, we all interacted in a way with each other that I think is unique to DeMatha. And I don't know when the term Jonan came about, but we would engage in that DeMatha brotherhood tactic all day, every day, and we, I think, developed thick skin because of it. But there were no secrets at DeMatha, and then the last C is compassion, the service requirements, the service leadership environment that DeMatha promotes is something that makes boys into men. So competition, certainly, camaraderie, and compassion make DeMatha a unique place.
Yeah, and from my perspective, similar to what I discussed earlier, but I think that just the experience and the standards that are set and the expectations, while going through the process, may not be something we fully realize, that the investment that's being made and those lessons and seeds that are being planted, but those things blossom. And once they do blossom, we do realize the great opportunity and blessing we have for having the opportunity to obtain an education. One thing is, it's not lost by me. I come from parents that, were, my mother was a nurse, my father was a sky cap. My father just turned 80 actually in August, and up until the pandemic was still going to work every day at 3:30 in the morning, been here for 52 years. So it's not lost on me in terms of the work ethic, what it took for me to have the opportunity, to go to a private school. And so, I look back on those things, and I really appreciate the investment that was made, in me, and to take pride in the things that I've turned out to be halfway decent, at least I think. So, those are things that, my wife and I model for our children, in that standard, and we set for them and tell them, say, I expect you all to be better, because you stand on our shoulders. Your starting point is much different than ours. So those things that we expect you to be able to achieve, we expect even greater things from you. And I think that that's how our community continues to be built, is generation after generation. And if we can continue to improve, then I think we'll be better off as a society.
Thank you, Dwayne. Before I get into my conclusion, I would just like to ask for, this is my advancement office plug, got to do a part of my job, but would like to ask for your support for the Fund for DeMatha, which we mailed out in October. It's critical to the school in support of our ongoing mission of educating faith-filled gentlemen and scholars. So you can give online at www.dematha.org. But just wanted to say thank you so much to Kevin and to Dwayne and for everyone for your terrific questions. It's a real pleasure getting to chat with you guys and having the opportunity to talk about all the great work you have done and continue to do and keeping our neighborhoods and our communities safe. So thank you so much, Kevin and Dwayne. I hope you guys, all have a wonderful and safe Christmas holiday. I know I see Kevin a lot on campus. Dwayne, if you're ever near, come stop by. Would love to take you out to lunch. But until then, I hope you guys stay safe. And thanks again for your time, guys.
Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Yep, go Stags.